Hi, so I'm Rodrigo.
Right.
I'm a clinical neuroscientist, and the question was, why did I choose NeurOptimal, right? Why this machine? Why now? To be honest,
So first, tell me about your background, your medical background. Yeah.
I studied. I'm a general practitioner. I studied med school. I graduated like 5 years ago, and then afterwards I went into neuroscience. I went to do a master's in cognitive neuroscience in the Netherlands for 2 years, and I just came back to America. And I was researching about the different machines that are out there, right, regarding to neuroscience. I searched up all of them, right, and I ended up with finding NeurOptimal and choosing this one because of the nonlinear dynamics behind it. There are, when I was studying about all of this and about the physiology of the brain, I discovered that there are no two brains that are alike, right? So when we try to develop a treatment to treat a specific condition or something, and we assume that two people are gonna benefit from the same exact, intervention, that I'm, as a clinician or as a practitioner, I'm deciding what that optimal state would look like. I think that can be a little difficult, right? When you're treating a patient and when you're expecting them to open up to you, right? And to like, okay, you're gonna treat my brain, right? The best way that I looked at it is the less that you intervene in the brain, the better. So that if you don't, you have to let the brain understand its own reality, right? So that it can, the brain is extremely wise.
Right.
So what I decided, it was like, I'm gonna look for a machine, that kind of globally or non-linearly records the brain activity, and it doesn't give you a diagnosis, right?
Had you had experience with the linear neurofeedback before?
Yes, I've had, not personally, but I know a lot of people and a lot of colleagues, who've used it.
Yes.
I was always reluctant to use it because of that part, right? Because of what I was saying earlier, that linear neurofeedback, it's very presumptuous in a way, because it's kind of like, using a lobotomy for everyone that has a kind of problem, right? It's like, I don't want to compare it, like, but I think it's an old way of looking at the paradigm. I think right now every single branch in science is bringing us closer to shifting the way we understand the brain, to shifting our understanding of it. Neuropsychology and like everything is telling us that most of our reality, most of what we perceive is has a biological, correspondence, right? Correspondent. And NeurOptimal opened my eyes to the possibility of helping a brain, heal itself without me as a physician adding more stress to the brain, like adding more drugs or adding more, changing the electromagnetic activity of different brain regions that might not need to be changed, because a lot of functions are overlapping. So if I use linear neurofeedback and I try to change a brain region, I can maybe alleviate some symptoms, but I can worsen some others for other different things. Why? Because I am adding energy to the brain, and I'm trying to change it, and I'm trying to force it to do something that I believe to be right. But that doesn't make it true, because I don't know that brain. I don't know the context of that brain. So this is just a mirror.
Right.
NeurOptimal is just a mirror for the brain to train itself and to be like, hey, maybe this train of thought is not ideal for me, so I might not go into it again. And this is what NeurOptimal offers.
So do you see the linear versus the NeurOptimal as applicable to different demographics? So would there be some patients where the linear system would be applicable?
Yes, I think so. But I think it would be for very specific, very specific, how do I call it? For example, if you have someone that has an epileptic, focus in the brain or something, and you know that part of the brain is, it's giving a lot of electricity,
right?
then yeah, a linear neurofeedback approach would be maybe better for that specific problem.
Right.
But if you're treating someone that's coming for a psychological or like a cognitive problem, that's most of the time the entire brain is involved in that. So if I use linear neurofeedback to try to produce a change, then I might change other things, because it's non-specific.
Right.
The depression is non-specific.
Right.
As an epilepsy that's in a specific part of the region.
Point, right.
Exactly, it's a focal point.
Right.
So yeah, you can target that with TMS or
Right.
with linear neurofeedback.
Right.
It would do the same thing.
Yeah.
But in this scenario, I'm talking about like an extremely complex issue that you cannot hope to fix by just clicking a button.
Right.
Because there's a lot of intricacies that go into a state of feeling about yourself.
Right. So up to now, what has been your clinical intervention for neuropsychiatric disease?
My clinical intervention for neuropsychiatric disease.
What have you used therapeutically?
I mean, I graduated I've used TMS,
TMS.
It's transcranial magnetic stimulation to treat attention when I was in the Netherlands doing my thesis and stuff. But I graduated 2 months ago, so I'm just about to start my clinical practice. And I chose this machine because I thought it was the best machine to start my clinical practice.
Prescription interventions?
Yeah, I mean, I've used a lot of antidepressant drugs. I mean, I have a medical license. I've prescribed antidepressants, and for myself as well, when I was in depression, I used 4 different types of antidepressants.
Right.
None of them worked.
Right.
The literature obviously the literature says that antidepressants work 22-25% of the time, and that's it. We haven't produced new or psychiatric drugs since the 90s.
Right.
So hoping to keep going down that path, it wasn't for me. I wanted to try something new, and that's why I went into neuroscience. I thought that trying to fix something in a systematic way, with like a drug treatment.
Yeah.
I think that's not the way to go. But I mean, that's my opinion, right? That's at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, actually, when we look at the pathophysiology now that we know about neuropsychiatric disease, the underpinning is inflammation, right?
Exactly.
We see that on the SPECT scan. So the treating that with SSRIs makes no sense now.
No sense at all. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, because we also use serotonin for a whole different plethora of things, right? So like inhibiting serotonin just to remove the emotional aspect of it. I mean, you're also messing up other systems, digestive systems and other different things that have nothing to do. And that's the same principle that I'm talking about, like the difference between linear and nonlinear. As physicians, we think we know, right? We think we know but science is changing every day.
Yeah.
So the way I see it is,
we're discovering.
Exactly.
Science stays the same. Yeah.
We discover something new, and science just becomes obsolete, and it happens all the time, right?
Right.
Like drugs that we used to swear by,
Right.
and then it was the drug, and like everyone used it, and right now it's like, don't touch that.
Can you repeat what you said about the ADHD medications in Mexico that are no longer legal?
Ritalin, you said was
Oh,
no
I think it
longer
was the
legal
Netherlands.
in Mexico.
No, I was saying like I mean, there are different drugs, right? Like every single country has its own legal, right, way of how do I say this? There are some drugs in the U.S. that we use for ADHD, like Ritalin and Adderall, that are not allowed in other countries, right? And there are other drugs that we use in Mexico that are not allowed to use in the U.S.
Right.
So at the end of the day, I'm guessing all of that has to do with actual like pharmaceutical distribution things. And,
okay.
More than actual evidence behind it, right? Because
Got
it's
it.
like, let's imagine that a pharma company just spent $2 billion developing this drug, right? They have to sell it in order to get that money back, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
But if I'm in France, I don't care about that. I mean, I'm getting that drug, I do a clinical trial, it didn't work on my people, so it's not legal here. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, I don't think it has much to do with what our evidence is telling us, but there's a lot of the different factors that go into it.
So like the drugs for Alzheimer's or that are used here in the United States. They're not used in the UK because they were proven. So their health care system the government pays for, so they're going to pay for things that actually work, right?
Exactly.
Whereas our economically driven paradigm here in the US, we're going to use what makes money for the drug companies. But they did the studies, they found out that those drugs don't work, and so they don't use them. They don't prescribe them.
Exactly. So I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think we're shifting. There's a paradigm shift happening in medicine, in which we're looking for answers elsewhere.
Yes.
Because there have been a lot of changes happening in the way we've treated people. In medicine, how we were taught to diagnose a problem or diagnose a disease, but I think we're looking at it in the wrong way, right?
And it has to do again with the evolution of scientific discovery. So we're in a zeitgeist now, I think, very similar to when we discovered that there were bacteria. There are these microbes that actually cause infections. It's not the humors, and we don't do the bleeding, right, bloodletting and that type of thing anymore. Yeah. So now that we're discovering, with this called the Human Genome Project. Yeah. So before that, we thought that in the absence of disease, most of the body was sterile. Yeah. Well, now we find that on your best day, you've got 10 times more bacteria alone in you than human cells. 10 times more bacteria. I mean, we're an ecosystem. And then we got viruses. And then we have fungi, right? Yeah. And so health is about keeping that autonomous homeostasis under control, right, with several things, because if that gets out of balance, that's when we get disease, and that's when the immune system starts producing those cytokines and inflammation and that type of thing. But 10 years ago, that information was not, we considered it, but just knowing that, it has just rewritten the books in medicine.
And you can apply that to the brain as well.
Of course,
10 years ago, we thought that the brain was set. You're done. You were born this way, and that's it. Like globally, like I'm talking about med school, not in a lab, neuroscientific lab somewhere. They've known about neuroplasticity for decades now, but I'm talking about we have this, I think, very old way of looking at medicine, right? Because we haven't updated the way we introduce physics and how we understand the universe into it. What do I mean by this? Before we used to think about gravity and stuff in very different terms than we do now. Newton's law and all that. Now Einstein and Tesla and everyone has changed our paradigm of how we look at how the universe works, right? How we look at time and our perception of time.
Right.
And that hasn't shifted in medicine. We're still looking at the body in those old physics terms. We're not talking about quantum anything. We're not talking about nonlinear dynamics. I mean, quantum means nonlinear dynamics. That's the same thing.
Right.
So why are we not introducing that into medicine? Why are we not introducing the part that, the heart, the gut, the mind, they're all connected and they're all working at the same time.
Right.
You cannot hope to treat depression only by clicking one button in the brain. Right. You have to treat it holistically.
Exactly.
So if you're treating the entire brain is connected to the entire body.
Right.
So if the NeurOptimal is detecting irregularities in electrical activity in different parts of the brain, that's correlated to the peripheral nervous system and to different glands and to different stuff. So if you're training the brain, you're not only training your brain, you're training your entire body without adding medicine, without hoping to without introducing external substances that can make it worse.
Right.
I mean, who knows, right? Maybe you're helping, maybe you're not. Or maybe you're helping right now and you're alleviating symptoms, but you're not actually touching the root of the problem.
Right.
And in this scenario, the brain is infinitely wise. So you're giving it the opportunity to look at itself and be like, hey, I could maybe change this or be better by at doing this without having someone that has never met me, be like, no, this is the way. There's no way. There's 7.5 billion brains. There's no one perfect brain. Doesn't exist.
Right.
So hoping to find one perfect drug that cures one, all-encompassing disease, I don't think that logic works anymore.
It makes no sense.
Exactly.
It makes no sense. And again, that has been because of this paradigm of treating or masking symptoms with these pharmaceuticals, right, that have no holistic interface with with humans. Right?
Exactly.
So I think this body is kind of like a big fish aquarium, right? And all the fish are in the same aquarium, right? So if there's this one sick fish here, right, that is sick because of the environment, well, just to take that fish out, you have to change the environment.
Exactly.
Right?
Otherwise, all the other fish are gonna get sick.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's the same thing. So
right.
You have to change the conditions. You have to change how you perceive yourself at the end of the day, right? Because the brain, I mean, it's a navigation system for your reality, right? So imagine if you have a boat. You're in a boat somewhere, right? And your steering wheel, or how do you call it? It's broken. It's in half. So how do you hope to navigate correctly? You can't. The only thing you can do is help fix that steering wheel so that you can navigate the entire thing, right?
Right.
If you don't have the steering wheel, it doesn't matter if you're working on the sails or working on anything else. You won't be able to navigate through reality.
Right.
So I mean, that's what the brain's for. The brain is that connection between, what's biological and what's perceived.
Right.
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 That's our gateway.
Yeah.
So I think the best way to better your circumstances is by bettering your brain.
Yeah.
Enhancing it.
So have you kind of tested the waters out there in the medical community there for the response, that might blowback that might happen, when you start treating these patients with NeurOptimal?
Oh, 1,000,000%, man. 1,000,000%. I mean, I've been talking to psychiatrists and neurosurgeons, and a lot of people are resistant to change, but they understand that it has to happen.
Right.
Right? Because our numbers are not good worldwide, right? We're going through the worst pandemic in history,
right?
Which is suicide.
Yeah.
Why? Because people are taking their own lives, right? It's not like influenza or the Spanish, that takes control out of people. Here, it's heartbreaking because people are, they can't. They're taking themselves off of the game board just because they don't understand their own minds, right? Their own. When we're in school, in elementary school, they don't teach us how to process our emotions or how to detect, anxiety levels or stuff like that. I mean, we have 12 years of math,
right,
but we don't have 15 minutes of meditation or how your brain works.
Yeah.
Not even in med school,
right.
Not even in med school. We have residents and medical doctors all over the world who are burned out and who are depressed and who are, working 24-hour shifts and treating people. And, if that's the example that we're giving patients,
exactly. I think our profession has the highest suicide rate of any profession,
Yeah, because we are so squared in our thinking, right? Because we think we know better. Because we think, what we learned in med school, it's the law.
Right.
That's not true, we're ignoring medicine that has existed for 5,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because we think that, a little machine that records it and it's, I think, this scenario is less is more,
yes.
Less is more in here, less diagnosis, less labeling things, less comparing people and being okay, he has this symptom, so it's this diagnosis. That's illogical. The brain is changing every single millisecond.
Right.
So any diagnosis that I give you today is going to be wrong tomorrow.
Right.
And if I treat you 20 years for the diagnosis that I give you today, then who has a problem? Me as a physician or you as a patient? I mean, that's the question. That's the real question.
Not being able to step in the same river twice.
Exactly. And then you have people who are taking these 5 or 7 psychiatric drugs and they do it for 20 years. Yeah. And they go back to their clinician and the only thing they do is up their dose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or add a benzo.
Or add
add a different benzo. And I don't think that's curing anything or helping anything. I think it's just prolonging the inevitable.
Well, it's not a matter of opinion, right? When we look at the statistics, right? I mean, with suicide, we have lots more drugs and we have lots more suicide, right? So if that was working, we should have less suicide, right?
Exactly.
So I mean, mass shootings and that type of thing. So that paradigm obviously not working, and we need to do something different, right? So I think the NeurOptimal and neurofeedback in general is how we address that, along with a lot of the stuff that I've been doing, addressing information like changing people's diets and adding some other things.
Yeah.
So.
And I also think NeurOptimal can work for absolutely anyone, right? Because we live in a society that's constantly overstimulating us to a point, right? That 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we didn't have smartphones.
Right.
You didn't keep up with 600 people every day. You were not comparing yourself to your Instagram feed, who's getting married, who has babies, who has this job,
Right.
That adds on to your cognitive processes.
Right.
Right? Back then, we were not that stimulated. Right now, there's hyperstimulation constantly, that tires the brain. You know, that makes it want like just not want to know about any more stuff, right? Because it's already subconsciously processing everything that you're, you know, receiving.
Right.
Even though you're not consciously paying attention to it, subconsciously your brain is working.
Right.
I like to use this example. Imagine that you're on your, you know, your web browser, and you're using, I don't know, Google, you know, like a search engine, and then you have different tabs open, you know, and you have 100 tabs open. All of that is going to take brain power. You know, it's going to take power and it's going to make the system slower.
Right.
So what do? You start closing tabs. If you start closing tabs, then, you know, the processing gets better. It's the same for here, you know. NeurOptimal, imagine that your brain right now has 100 tabs. You plug yourself in and your brain is going to recognize that it doesn't need all of those other tabs to be open. So it's going to start closing them.
Right.
So it's going to, you know, I think it's gonna enhance the way your perception of the world and your perception of yourself, and that's what's gonna help you, you know, get better. Because I'm not diagnosing something that's gonna be like that's not set in stone.
Right. What was your background before medicine?
I was severely depressed. I mean, I lived with chronic depression when I was 16 until, you know, like my mid-20s, and the only thing that worked, I mean, I tried 4 different types of antidepressants. I tried yoga, meditation, I tried everything. The only thing that worked was educating myself in how the brain really works. You know, what we know now about the brain. Like, I ignored everything that I knew about, like, that I learned in med school. I not ignored it, but like set it apart for a second and was like, how can I find similarities between what we know about the brain now and what ancient philosophers were telling us 2,000 years ago? So, you know, the Stoics, the Hindus, everyone, you know, like, and you go all over the world and you find similarities in mythology and you start understanding that, you know, reality is not that complicated. Yeah. We're just complicating ourselves, and that complication is what's producing our disease.
I asked that question because as a physician, you're precocious in your perception of us having the wrong paradigm. Usually for that to happen, right, something has to happen to you or a loved one, you know, so the analogous thing that happened to me, you know, is I was an ER physician and I developed high blood pressure, diabetes, and high cholesterol, right? And so reflexively, so even though I have a PhD in cardiovascular pharmacology, my PhD was cutting out the arteries in rat tails, putting them in ionic solutions to see what controlled blood pressure, right? Yeah. And so my paper was, you know, magnesium and potassium relaxes blood vessels, calcium constricts, right? Nitric oxide relaxes. Yeah. Intellectually knowing that, right, PhD, what did I do when I developed high blood pressure? Reflexively, I went for the drug.
Of course.
But it gave me so many side effects that is really what set in motion, you know, my embrace of again, you know, natural medicine, or actually, I won't say natural medicine. I will say going back and doing what you did is learning about the physiology. Yeah. So approaching human biochemistry like a car mechanic would approach a car.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I did, and that's what what my logic told me. You know, like, I think if you're not getting better, you know, and you're trying everything, you know, the newest drugs and you're getting worse. Right. Then there's a fundamental, you know, misunderstanding here.
Right,
about
There's a disconnect there.
There's a disconnect there.
But even with that disconnect, though, and this is why I call you precocious, even with that disconnect, most physicians keep doing the same thing and getting the same bad results over and over and over and over again.
I agree, but I think this is a generational shift.
Yes.
I think this is, I'm not the only one that thinks like this. I think this is happening all over the world, and we're being pushed to it, right? Because our results in medicine, you know, worldwide, they're not living up. You know, we're not getting ourselves out of the ditch. Right. You know, we're just making it bigger. Right. By ignoring that it's not working. Right. Right. Yeah. So I think it's taking, you know, it's putting my neck out there for people to be like, hey, he's a witch or whatever, you know, because you don't think like them. But at the end of the day, I don't care about that. I care about my patients. Yep. So if my patient's gonna get better by my methodology, then who cares what the other doctors say? You know, like at the end of the, you know, actions speak louder than words.
Can we take a pause?
Sure. Yeah.